Coming in, nice to see you. We're going to get started in a minute or two, so come on in and make yourself comfortable. Feel free to say hello in the chat. But I was just thinking today, I was just talking to another client. I felt like this, I mean, we're the second week of January. I feel like it should be like the third month of the year or something. Last
Right.
week was like a year long. What happened? I feel like,
Yeah.
the holidays were so long ago. I don't know. There's just it's been a
Yeah.
wild start to the year, I'd say.
Yeah. Especially looking down south for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Like the images that are coming out daily are just are mind boggling. Mind
yeah,
boggling.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought it was okay. This is not good on the day that it happened, and then every day after, I'm like, this is really bad,
I know.
really bad.
This is really
Um,
bad.
yeah, yeah,
I know. And I think the other thing too that I noticed this year, I think so many people have been really uh working, it's like working harder, or just with the pandemic, I think this layer of uncertainty we've had has been so heavy that one of the
right.
things I noticed was a lot of people just shut down over the holidays. I know you guys did.
Yes.
I mean, we did too. We took a full 2 weeks off. And so it just seems
Yeah,
like coming back into January, like you're really behind the eight ball on a lot of things that,
yeah,
you were kicking off in the second week of January or the third week of January,
right.
right? So it's been a very fast start to the year, I've found, which
I heard from a bunch of girlfriends last night who were just like, they just kind of felt like it feels worse right now
yeah,
than it
yeah,
did before. Like
yeah,
there's just something that feels heavier and longer and harder
yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
I agree.
Um, and that's homeschooling is
Well,
proving
that
to be more difficult now. So yeah, I think it's going in waves for everybody, right?
I think it really is. It really is. Well, that's going to be the topic today. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to jump into it. I know a few people are streaming in. Great to see all of you. Thanks for joining us today. And feel free to chat, throw a hello in the chat. Tell us how you're, maybe I've been doing this thing. I don't know if you do this, Zenia, but I do this thing where I pick a word for my year. So what's going to be the
Oh
word for,
yeah.
in my year, this year, I decided that my word is going to be the word purpose. I found out that in Kwanzaa, they have different principles for the various
Yep.
days of Kwanzaa. And the fifth day of Kwanzaa happens to fall on my wedding anniversary. And
Ah,
the fifth day, the principle is Nia, which means purpose. And Nia
purpose.
also happens to be my daughter's name. So I thought
Wow.
there's something in the universe that has made me
Yes.
discover that this year. And so my year this year is about purpose and being purposeful and deciding. I now I'm kind of channeling the Derek Sivers mantra. If it's not a hell yes, it's going to be a hard no for me this year.
Okay.
This is
Good.
my whole thing. But do you do that? Do you do like a one
I
word
don't have
purpose?
a word this year. Or I haven't done that, but I feel like now I need to go away and think about my word. But I'm not really sure what it would be on the spot this moment. Like there's just so much going on and so much to process, I feel like on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Um, that I'd really have to think about that one.
Yeah. So think
Yeah.
about it. And everybody on the call
Yeah.
too, think about it. If you have a
Yeah.
word, throw it in the chat. People's words for this year, 2021. All right, so here we are, everybody. Our theme for today is keep your sanity while navigating uncertainty. I love, it's the sanity part that I'm kind of curious about today, I have to say. So joined by friend, colleague, Zenia Wadhwani, who is with Woodbine Entertainment and who has been on a interesting journey corporately, I would say, as well as personally. So we're going to dive
Mhm.
into really how do we channel into 2021, and I think take the lessons learned from before and make it a positive start to this year. And so the lines are going to be muted, but feel free to use the chat, we'll be kind of monitoring it. These sessions are always about what you guys want to be curious about. I've been playing around with Clubhouse. That's the new hottest app that's out there, which is kind of like podcasts where people sit in the room and they listen and they can ask questions. And I think, oh, Ask the Expert's been like Clubhouse before Clubhouse.
Yeah.
Clubhouse. So there we go. So as we're kind of going through this, I think you're going to, I know everybody on here has been having their own experience with with COVID, and we've all got lessons learned from last year. So I think for Zenia and I, it's really to kind of curate a place for all of us to sort of share strategies and ideas and observations and learn from each other. So without further ado, so why don't you give us sort of a bit of a 411 just on yourself, background, what you do, and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation.
Sure. So I'm currently, as noted, the director of corporate citizenship for Woodbine Entertainment. It's actually sort of my first time in the sort of the corporate sphere. Most of my career has been in the nonprofit and in the government sphere. I spent most of my career in the nonprofit world, doing community building and strategic engagement and strategic planning and program development and all kinds of fun stuff to get people active and engaged in their communities and involved. So I worked for the Pan Am Games organizing committee. I've worked for United Way. Lots of fun and interesting spaces to be. But I quite enjoy this, being on the sort of the other side of the fence, where I'm able to, sort of give out the funds, and that's a nice feeling. And to get my colleagues and employees engaged and excited about volunteering and giving, and what that does to a workspace and how that enriches a workspace. So that's my sort of my day job. But otherwise, I have a daughter and a husband and a dog and a cat, and, and an otherwise busy household.
Well, tell us a little bit about what's it, because Woodbine, I mean, for those maybe who aren't familiar with Woodbine, horse racing. So
Yes.
racetracks, Mohawk and
Yep.
Woodbine racetrack here in Toronto. How did the pandemic affect you, the organization, and kind of what was your life like last year from March?
Yeah, I mean, it was very challenging, as for most businesses. It was certainly challenging for Woodbine as well. We were all shut down as a business right from the get-go, and unfortunately, that meant a significant number of furloughs, including myself initially, for the first 4 months. And as the business sort of tried to figure out what does business look like now? How do we transform? What do we do? But proudly, we were actually one of the first sports, if not the first sport, to come back to play, and so we were able to do that in a very safe manner. All the while taking care of the horses and managing that. But we were able to really get back up and running sooner than everybody else, which was a testament, I think, to the planning, the leadership, and the amount of work that went into ensuring that let's try to. It's a new normal, or it's a new space. We need to figure out how to do that, and let's do it in the best way possible, because we need to keep safety number one. But we need to try to continue to do what it is that we do best. And so they've done a really good job of that, and really try to bring people back into the flow. But as this pandemic changes, week after week, day after day, new business decisions are being made on the fly, right? As they are for many others.
Yeah, so let's kind of backtrack to kind of the beginning of the pandemic. And I mean, I remember when we were doing, when this was all coming out, and I think for all of us, we were kind of chatting before we jumped into the conversation a bit about how, really now we're kind of going into, I don't know if you would call it phase 2 or phase 3. Like right now, it does feel different than it felt back in March, because back in March, we didn't really know what was in store for us, and it was a little bit of like, okay, we're going to close down for 2 weeks. We're going to close down for And I remember there was this really funny meme that it probably came out around May, and it was this guy in a rowboat in a storm surrounded by sharks. And it was, this guy rowing, and it said underneath, the headline was something like, "Now's a great time to write your book." And I thought it was so funny when you and I were talking, because you actually did write a book in the middle of the pandemic.
That's right.
That's right. About Diwali and the Diwali celebration. So tell us a little bit about how you what did writing the book do for you, and tell us a little bit about that journey and experience, because
for sure. Yeah, I mean, I will admit that the seed or the germ of the the main character in the book, it's the best way to describe it is, I can show you a little picture, but that's sort of what the character looks like. is it, I would call it, an Indian version of Cookie Monster. He likes Indian sweets, which are called mithai. And so that sort of began about 9 years ago when I was pregnant with my daughter and staring at this huge tray of Indian sweets. And I just took this really funny picture, like I was just going to gobble the whole thing down. And my husband took a photo, and I said, "Oh my God, that looks kind of funny. It looks like a mithai monster." And there's a character and there's a story there. And so I thought I had something at that point, but then, 9 years went by, and I tried to write a few stories and none were too successful. And then, fast forward to March 2020. And I think that, to your point, we all found ourselves in a bit of a boat. And at that time, it felt, to be honest, like a bit of almost like a novelty. Oh, there's this new adventure we're all going through, right? But this boat sort of idea has really sort of, I think, survived this in terms of the memes, in terms of, we're all in different kinds of boats. Let's be clear, some of us are in yachts and some of us are in dinghies and some of us are on life rafts, and but we're in this ocean together. And for me, the sharks, if you will, were different things. So there was this, being furloughed was a shark for me at that moment. I had this milestone birthday that I knew was less than 365 days away for me. And I kind of felt like, oh, I got to do something. So that was a bit of a shark for me. And, another big one was just simply this unknown, right? Like, how long is this going to last? And what does this mean for our family? And what does this mean for the future? And what does this mean for our health? That big unknown was a big, massive shark. And then I would say there were all these little baby sharks. Like, I had to be a part-time teacher to my daughter and I sucked at it, right? Like, I was just really bad at it. And then I had to become this short order cook and I was grumpy about that. And that was like another thing that was just like, blah. So it sort of all culminated into, I was worried. I felt, I think, a little bit lost. But in a way, it was a perfect storm because I desperately needed to find something for me. Something that I could, latch onto, something that I could sink my teeth into, something that I could feel good about. And I needed to do that now. I had done my research in terms of what it would take to do a children's book. And I knew that had I gone the traditional route of a traditional publisher, it would have taken me 2 years from them saying yes. And it often takes 6 months to get a rejection. So I knew that was not the route that I was going to take. So I did something that I have done often in my life, which is I find very helpful. And that's this sort of mind shift thinking of when the world is telling you everything you can't do, what can you do, right? And it's similar into diets. Well, you can't have this and you can't have that. Well, what can you have? And that really begins to make you flip and think about, well, there's still things to do. There's still possibilities. And, as I looked at my bucket list or my to-do list in life, and I was like, I can't travel, can't have events, I can't do this. But one of those things that I could do is turn to the arts and turn to books, which I love and have been, an avid fan of for all my life, and go back to the writing. And that's sort of exactly what I did. I dusted off a bunch of my old notes and my ideas and started reworking at some of that to say, do I really have something here? And when that nugget sort of came, the book is called "'Twas the Night Before the Volley," and it was June. And the volley this past year was mid-November. So I knew that there was this really hard deadline. And deadlines work well for me personally. So I knew that if that event was happening mid-November, there was no way that this book couldn't be out by the beginning of October, which in all intents and purposes was kind of a little bit insane at that time. I didn't have an illustrator. My copy wasn't finished. Nothing was sort of where it needed to be. And so I hunkered down and I worked on that copy, and then I shared it with my husband. And what's not that I sort of needed his validation, but he's really good at sort of being very honest and encouraging and supportive. And so his feedback was, I think you've actually got something here. And in that moment, I was like, yes, okay. So now, and that support system is important, right? Let's not be fooled that support system is really, really important. And so I also had to recognize that I was in a place of privilege, that I could do that I could afford the money to invest into doing this project, that I could afford not to be really stressed out about work we were going to be okay. My husband was still working, that I didn't have those same kind of stressors. And it's not that I wasn't worried. There was all of that going on in the background. But this sort of gave me a little bit of focus to say, I need to do this for me, and I need to do it now. So that perfect storm sort of came together in terms of, how that project really got started. And that's when I was like, copies down, researching illustrators and contacting people and having conversations and researching, what it was going to take to make this happen.
Yeah, and I think, we had a speaker on in the fall who was, she's written a book called, or it's a journal actually called Calm the Chaos. And
Right.
she was sharing that the year before the pandemic, actually, her husband had been diagnosed with a very, very significant health issue. And they didn't actually know if he was going to live. And so she was spending all this time in the hospital, sitting at his bedside. And one of the things she created in that was a set of cards called the Calm the Chaos card deck that she's got, that are kind of daily inspirations. And what she talked about was, when you're in uncertainty, she called it buoys. Like, you need these little buoys that are in the water that you can kind of latch onto, these little
Right.
things that you can hold on to during the time. And it really sounds like, as I'm listening to you talk, it's like, it makes me really think about, what can you control? And when we're in a pandemic,
Right.
and so much uncertainty, and there are so many things that are going on around us that we cannot control, this is something that, you have control over. Right.
Right.
Did you find
Right.
that from doing this kind of a project? Like, what were sort of like, as you look back on that experience, how
Yeah.
did the process of writing this book and having something like this in your life at that time help you?
It certainly gave me something I could control, but the reality is I didn't know everything, right?
Mhm.
And that I didn't know, there are things that were still outside of my control. Would I be able to get an illustrator on board fast enough? Would
Mhm.
he or she be able to produce the stuff that I needed to do fast enough? Would I be able to upload and get things done fine? What are the glitches? There were things that I couldn't control,
Yeah.
but out of my own purpose and what I could do, yes, that was a bit of control. It gave me a a creative and intellectual challenge that I sort of desperately needed at that time, right?
Mhm.
And so there was so much, like I said, that I didn't know. That the one of the big learnings was, the writing the book, getting that sort of going was half the work. Because I had decided to do this, the sort of the self-publishing route. I am now the marketing person, the coordinator, the distributor, all of the other roles that come along in that industry, I now had to take on myself
Mhm.
and learn. Um, but the other big thing that it taught me was that you can, when everything feels like no, you can still have, yeah, you can still have positive and good stuff come out of
Mhm.
all of the no's and negatives that are happening around you, right? And that everybody really does have a story to tell
Mhm.
in this process. So that much that I could control, yes, that was helpful. Because I think the last thing I needed was more that I couldn't control or
Yeah.
more that I didn't know,
Yeah.
right?
And I think too, having something that's totally takes you away from the
Yes,
day-to-day reality, the worry about, will I have a job? Are we going to
right,
recover from this? All of those things, right? It's something to channel
right.
creativity into. Because I think
Yeah,
about like where we're at now, and I think for a lot of us, the managing teams and thinking about, like, and even for ourselves, I find as leaders, right? Um, this where we're at now, we're in January. So March,
yeah,
we knew we were coming into spring.
yeah.
We don't know, we're going into, the January is a tough month. And I hate saying that because it's my birthday month. So I always feel like January should be a great month, but I find January one
Right.
of the hardest months for me personally. And
Yeah.
it always feels like, I think maybe being in sales for years, in sales, your December, you're like, woohoo, we hit our targets, and you're back
Yeah,
to zero again. There's something
yeah,
about
yeah.
kind of mentality. But, I guess as you think about, this next piece, and for a lot of people, the reprieve is heading south for a few weeks and doing,
Right.
it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot on this agenda. So, from what you've learned, what are you starting to think about to kind of navigate through this time for yourself?
Yeah.
how do you keep your own mental energy on that positive, that inspirational
Right.
side? And what are you thinking about for yourself and the folks that you work with?
I think one of the things that we all turned to during this time was the arts. So whether it was books or TVs or movies or what have you, that's one thing that I will continue to find myself drawn to or going back into. And so I never kind of want to hear anybody else ever say again, well, what's the value of the arts and why should we be investing in it? Because that's just nonsense. Um, it has such great value. So I think that I will most certainly be turning back to those things as I have in the past. I will admit that I will also be turning to wine often, as I did in these past several months. That has been helpful. I think one of the other things is, people keep talking about, gratitude and how important that is. But I can't actually stress how important that really was. And so there were, I think it was probably daily where I had to say, yes, you don't at this point. I mean, I got called back to work in August, but during that time, you don't have the job, you don't have this, but reminding, that there was someone still working in the house, that you still had a home, that there were people who were in situations that were far more grave than yours. That was constant, which did not take away from the fact that this was all challenging and difficult. It wasn't about sort of ignoring that, but it was about recognizing where we were in the big picture. So that gratitude piece was important, and it continues to be. I continue to put that on, and knowing that we need to be grateful for X, Y, and Z. I am a big believer in making sure that you have a good sense of humor. And so whether you're reading stuff or diving into stuff or listening to stuff or whatever it is, or the people that are around you, it's a good thing I live with people that I like. So that's helpful. But definitely a sense of humor goes a really, really long way. And making those connections to people, right? Who are the people who really matter to you at the end of the day? I think a lot of people have sort of figured out what it is that I really need and what I really don't need. But my part of my advice would be, have people taken the time to think about what really makes you smile on a day-to-day basis? The little things. What are the things that can bring that smile to your face? Is it a trashy TV show? Is it that glass of wine again? Is it a quiet hour away from the rest of your family? Or is it just some really good time to chat with a girlfriend or a friend? That kind of stuff almost needs to be scheduled in, like you would schedule in a workout, or you would schedule in that you got to eat, and all of these things. Figuring out what it is that makes you smile or inspires you in a day, I think now is part of the coping, or part of the way to just recognize that there are these little things. And I think part of that equation is really asking yourself some questions. So when this is all over, or when this period, and it too shall pass into whatever else it passes into, what will be different for you? What do you want to be different for you? Where do you want to be, and how will things look and be different? And I remember asking myself that back in June, saying, how long is it going to take before we're going to see behavioral change in people towards the environment, towards other things? Will it take a few weeks? Will it take a few months, and will we revert back? I don't know. That's going to be different for everybody, but I think everybody needs to ask themselves some questions in terms of what's going to be different for them in terms of their decisions in life, and where there now might be an opportunity to think about some of those changes.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned to you, I think there's two things that are coming up for me. One of my favorite movies of all time, which we recently watched. I introduced my daughter to it, and my husband watched it, and he goes, "Is this?" At the end of the movie, he goes, "Is this still your favorite movie of all time? Why do you like this movie so much?" But it's Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. And what I love about that movie is it's the journey he goes on from denial, like this isn't happening, something must be wrong here, why am I waking up in the same days repeating itself, to like anger and then hate, right? And then he moves to acceptance, and when he's in acceptance, then he becomes the virtuoso pianist and the ice carver and all of these things that he wants to do. And I think the monotony is what is killing a lot of us right now. Like
Right.
it's monotonous. It's the same thing every day. And I have one of my coworkers is based in Montreal. Well, they're under curfew right now. You know, they can't
Yes.
go out without permission. And so, you know, I was thinking to myself, like, it's sort of like, don't waste a good pandemic. You know, like you can keep yourself stuck in the denial, the resistance. I don't want to be here. This sucks. Da, 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 da. Or you can really sort of move yourself forward and say, how am I going to look at this period of my life, not as this defining moment that, wrecked everything and it
Yes.
caused disappointment, or that's very close for me right now. I've got a daughter who's in grade 12. You know, she is not having the grade 12 experience she wanted to
Right.
have. You know, there is
Right.
no prom, there is no big
Right.
fun show, there is no ruling the school in grade 12. How do you make this not a defining moment, but simply a chapter in your life? And how do you
Right.
use that chapter? And so I think that piece of, you know, as you think about what's next, you've written a book in the first place. What are you thinking about for 2021 for yourself to kind of continue to build off of what you're learning about yourself, what you want to get deeper into? I mean, talk about, you know, the distractions of it, but what's next for you, I suppose, as you think of this experience?
You know, one of the greatest things coming out of this experience for me was, you know, I'll go back to, you know, one of the reasons why I wrote this book was um, because when I was growing up, I didn't see a lot of reflections of myself in the media that I
Mhm.
consumed. um, and, you know, many years later for my daughter, and I'm looking for books for her, and I wasn't seeing a lot of her and us reflected in that stuff. And so I wanted to write something that she could see herself in,
Mhm.
essentially.
Yeah.
And I think when I was growing up, what I often did is I sort of said, you know, well, what I wonder what that story would be like if it was written from my perspective or from my household. What would the smells be different? What would the, you know, the chatter be different? What conversation would be? What would the South Asian lens be to that? And so part of that was, you know, here's his story. The illustrator was able to sort of look at my daughter and sort of put a little bit of her. She could actually literally see herself in this book.
Mhm.
So I knew that mattered to me. But when the book came out and others started responding in the exact same way, that there were educators who were, oh my God, I need to feature this book and I need to share this with the children in my school because they don't see this. I haven't seen this. You know, you know, City TV had done a little story on the book and talked about how took the angle on the story of you know, representation matters, right?
Mhm.
And was able to talk about the book. And Minister Hassan tweeted, came out and sort of said, hey, this woman wrote a book because representation matters. And it dawned on me at that point how much this matters, right?
Mhm.
And so that to me has been a huge inspiration for me going forward as I think about, you know, was this going to be a one-time thing that I did? Was there going to be a series? Oh, I want to do more. I was so encouraged by hearing that there was the need for that and that landscape. Like if you know, there's a whole. I'm not going to go into it, but you know, the research on children's books and diversity in North America is appalling.
Oh
It's
yeah.
absolutely appalling. And so to have contributed to that a bit and to and yes, it's changing. Um, you know, that has been a big inspiration for me, big time.
Mhm.
But I, you know, I'm looking for, yeah, am I going to be writing another story? Am I going to be, because I'm a true believer in everybody's a storyteller, right?
Mhm.
Everybody has that in them. But I think you know, a big part of that inspiration too is I found a little bit of myself again. You know, prior to kids and marriage and all of that stuff, I used to do these fun projects for just because they were fun. It wasn't about making money. It wasn't about doing anything. I used to do these things, and I found that I had lost that
Mhm.
for for the past many years. That's not to blame anybody for that. That was just sort of how life happens. And so in doing this project, I found a bit of my voice again. So
Mhm.
it was really beneficial for me in terms of being able to say, yes, you still can do some of that fun stuff that you quite enjoy. Um, but the other big piece out of that was I showed my daughter a different part of me, right?
Mhm.
Other than the woman who cooks and takes her to school and does all this other stuff and goes to her job. there was a passion project that I was able to say, hey, this is something that I want to do for me. It's one of my dreams. And I made it come true. And I knew that was real because as she saw me go through that process, as she saw me doing all the work, and I was, checking the copy with her and checking the illustrations with her to see what she thought. She came back to me one day and she said, so Mommy, I just want to let you know that I'm working on a book, and can you get it on Amazon for me? And I was like,
I
well,
love
I don't
it.
know about the Amazon part, but let's check it out. Let's read your book and see how this goes. But those are the inspirational things that I'm, taking from this experience and taking forward with me, because I can see not only the positive effect that this book has had for me personally, for my family, but to a community of people who have been looking for more of these kinds of stories. So that to me has been incredibly what I'm taking forward.
I love that. And I love this. And I really do love I think, everybody was talking about the power of the pause last year, that the whole, this whole pause,
Yes.
I think created space for a lot of discussion around things like representation, inclusivity. I know for myself personally, like I was saying to somebody last week, the learning curve is such that we all start in that place of unconscious incompetence. We don't even realize we're incompetent. And then something happens and the next stage is to recognize your incompetence,
Yes.
right? You move to conscious incompetence. And I think for a lot of people that I would say, in the white race, a lot of us were unconsciously incompetent when it came to truly understanding systemic racism and truly understanding all of the implications around that. And I think and it's uncomfortable, but I think there's been I think what the space has provided over the last, whatever many months, 10 months now, I guess, has been, I think, a space to bring that up and to have people really start to look and see, where this awareness is going to take them, right? And I think so. There's been great power in the pause, I think, on a cultural level, on a societal level, and then as individuals to connect to and find the things that really do energize us. And I think as women, and I know we've got a lot of women on the on the call today. I was kind of looking to sitting there. I do think generally that's also a women thing. We tend to subjugate needs and wants to prioritizing family, and we sort of put it in the back burner. And I think, like yourself, there's a number of people I've talked to this year that have found, these things that they haven't done in many years have resurfaced. And so it's really powerful. And so I think about, and I think about the role that you play within Woodbine and, the sense of community, community, and you've always been a big community builder and that's, bringing together. The one thing that I feel, so it's great to have this individual piece, but I'm reading Sapiens right now. So I'm really in this fascinating thing about the human condition and how we evolved in evolutionary science, biology. And I think the one thing that is really crippling right now is our lack of social connection. And so as I think you think about it through the lens of the work you do on the regular and on the daily basis, what are you thinking about as you think about community and community building in a time where we can't physically get together? So what's kind of going through your mind as somebody who's a community builder and who's spent a lot of time, I would think, being around people and probably getting a lot of from that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is incredible how many restrictions we have right now in terms of being able to do that. So that it certainly doesn't make the work easy. But there are like little things that we have done that have helped along the way. So one of the things in particularly in my department is I've instituted that every, and these are just examples, right? They're small examples, but every last Friday of the month, we get together for lunch on Zoom. You have to show your face. You're not allowed to talk about work. You have to have food. We talk about our personal lives, and if you'd like a libation, you're more than welcome to have that. But it is this 1 hour of I get to see your face, because some people are coming onto their Zoom meetings and they're turning off their screens and they don't want to comb their hair and they don't want to show their face, but they're there, they're present for their meetings. But part of the requirement is, sometimes it's helpful to run that brush through your hair, be presentable, and show up. right? Show
Yeah.
up in a way that you used to. So there, and we talk about all kinds of nonsense, and the idea is just to sit and make ourselves laugh. And if there's a theme going on, like if it's Halloween, you have to come up in a costume, and if it's something else, we'll make something up. But the idea is to have something to look forward to and to be able to connect on a social level,
Mm.
with your colleagues. Over the Christmas break, we used to do a lot in terms of team volunteering and, a lot of giving and a lot of giving in kind and that kind of thing. So we did a lot of our financial contributions this past year. We did a lot of in kind. Sadly, with our restaurants closing, we donated so much food to food banks, or we felt at least good about the fact that was just it was a time it was needed, and we were able to play a part in that. But one of the silly things that sort of I feel like I came up with was doing a bit of a secret Santa. And
Mm.
so everybody being secluded in their homes, we said, okay, who wants to sign up for participating in this? What you have to agree to is you're not going to spend more than $10. We're going to find somebody who lives within your radius, and you have to go and drop off something secretly at their home, and you will get something dropped off at your home. And so we had actually a decent participation rate, but the thing that I heard over and over and over again from every single person who signed up was, thank you for doing this. This is so much fun. It was just a tiny thing, but this was so much fun. What a a fun way to get engaged and connect with my colleagues again. And then people were like sending their photos and sharing things, and we were able to, create that little bit of an online community. Those are really small examples, but I saw that just that tiny thing and how far that went for some people, sort of reinforced the fact that I'm looking into virtual volunteering now, as many charitable organizations are offering that, and other companies are looking into what does that look like. We had volunteer opportunities within the organization where people could assess applications that came in for funding. That will continue. We will still be able to engage our employee base on being able to do that online. There's a lot more research that sort of needs to be done that way in terms of what else we can offer. But we continue to connect with the organizations that we fund and that we give, and trying to listen, right? Really listen to what it is that they need right now that we can still assist with in other ways. Are we able to do that through the virtual volunteering? Are we able to do that in kind? Because even if we can't gather together, there might still be ways to pull our resources together. The only thing I want to be mindful about that conversation is that, when we're asking our employees to participate in these things, we also need to be mindful of the fact that for some of them, it just might be another ask that's too much.
Right.
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 And so that balance between, again, offering them something to participate in, optional, participate as you can and wish, and if you can't, that's totally okay. But I think we need to do more listening to our employees to say, what do they need and what do they want right now? And I think one of the biggest things that we can all do is for our teams is be flexible. Really be flexible, really be understanding. If you're one of those individuals who is a clock watcher, this is not the time to be a clock watcher. This is the time to think, we'll focus on the outputs, we'll focus on the outcomes, but really focus on your people, because at the end of the day, they will be what allows your business to survive.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because we have a research partner that looks at the behaviors that leaders need to amp up in varying situations. And I mean, you could, you have to sort of look at it through the lens of what's the situation I'm is being required of me as a leader. But they did a bit of like assessment research and or pre research that they still need to kind of dig into it a little bit more. But the early indicators that they shared with us on leading, it's not just leading virtually, but it's leading virtually in a pandemic where you've got all this uncertainty.
Right.
What are the behaviors that leaders really need to amp up? And two of them were behaviors like empathy. So really understanding the shoes, which is, what you're talking about there. And then also cooperation, which in their definition of their assessment tool is being willing to trade off. So, if somebody can't make a meeting because they've got to homeschool their kids,
right.
when do you move the meeting to so it's more inclusive and available for everybody versus being rigid around saying, well, we always have our meetings on Mondays at 9:00. Well, maybe start them at 9:10. Right. So I think this is something that, as leaders, we need to be hyper aware of. And also, knowing, I think that everybody is in such a different situation around this does require that extra empathy. And yet I feel, correct me if I'm wrong from your perspective, but I feel a little bit like for some of our senior folks, there was a bit of, okay, pandemic, get everybody set up at home, mental health, let's make sure we're doing all these things to make sure
Yes.
people are really happy. And now we're back to business as usual. And we just happen to have this pandemic still hanging over us. But really, haven't we dealt with that? Let's get into 2011, or 2021. It's a new year.
Right.
Let's get going on our to-do list. And so like, I don't know, are you noticing some of that? I'm not necessarily trying to out Woodbine here, but just generally, do you feel like there's a bit of a mood shift where, because I find a lot of senior leaders, a lot of us in senior leadership roles, I think one of the things we have to contain is our, results orientation and wanting to
Right.
get stuff done. But curious.
I'm proud to say that, at Woodbine, the focus has really been, there has been a real mindfulness about the people and where we're at and what it's doing. And yes, let's get them set at home. Let's be flexible and all depending on individual managers and the like in terms of how that's managed. But I think the thinking is real in the sense of it's business transformation. It's understanding that the business is not going to be the same.
Yeah.
Right. And that in this is actually an opportunity from perhaps shedding some of the things that didn't work or didn't work well, and really thinking about how are we going to do things differently. So I don't feel like I'm particularly hearing like, let's just all get back to work. I think it's more of how are we going to ensure that this business survives?
Yes.
And what do we need to change to get there? So that's the message that I'm really hearing. And I think that I can't imagine that there's any other way to really be thinking about that right now, because it's not the same, right? And it's not going to be the same. So there's this real sense of understanding and being flexible enough to know that some of those decisions may very well be changing daily, weekly, monthly, whatever they might be, right? We're not coming up with a 3-year strategic plan right now. That would be, I don't know, unless you're a fortune teller, that's not really the way to be going right now.
Yeah.
So for
I
us,
feel like in the early stage for us anyway, we were literally doing week to week. Like what did this week, what did we see? And then now I think we're at about 30 days. Like now I can kind of feel like, okay, 30 to 90 days, sort of having a loose 90-day plan, but we're more focused on the next 30 days. And let's just see. Right? It is really tricky to kind of manage the longer intent. So folks on the call, any questions that you have, feel free to, now's a great time to start dropping those into the chat or into the Q&A to make sure that, if there's things that we've been talking about, or even like if you have an opinion on anything that we've been talking about, counter opinion, pop it in there now. But yeah, I'm curious a little bit about, as you think about silver linings from the pandemic, is there anything else from a professional standpoint as you think about it within the workplace? I mean, it sounds like it's really given you guys at Woodbine a chance to step back and really, it's kind of like, I feel like the work from home thing was a really big silver lining, because there was a lot of senior.
I was going to say that.
Nobody can work from home. We'll never be productive. And now all of a sudden, like, oh, wait, people are actually getting stuff done. This is okay. Are there any other kind of silver linings professionally that you've seen kind of emerge?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for sure that would be the biggest one. All the deniers of working at home are just like been proven wrong, I think. And so I think that's certainly the biggest one. I think that there's, that being able to sort of witness more openly that empathy from senior leadership. I mean, we knew it was there. We're very much a values-based company that has always had about this caring about the employees and caring about community central to the work that we do, and always espoused by senior leadership. So that's always been there, but to really sort of see that come out now in terms of, we want to continue with the community work we're doing. We want to be able to give where we can still give. We want to be able to be flexible with our employees and help them do that. We've got a whole, team that works around really trying to do that for our employees. Witnessing that in a very different state is very reassuring about knowing that you belong to a company that actually is is trying to do that and be honest about that. There's a lot of best practices out there in terms of what you need to be doing with your employees now. And as I was doing some of that research, I think, okay, how does corporate citizenship look different this year? I was so pleased that as I was going through, other companies' lists, that I'm like, we do that. We do that. Our CEO is often communicating with the employee base about what is happening with the business on a regular basis, whether that's a town hall or through an email or something else. He's doing that. It's about being fair and open in those communications. It's about trying to accommodate where you need to accommodate. It's about continuing where you can continue and what you can still control. All of those things that are sort of those best practices, I'm very pleased to say, we're doing a lot of that. There's still stuff that we need to change and do differently, but we're all learning. So I find that I actually have a fair amount of forgiveness all the way around, whether, not just, I'm not really talking even about the workplace. I'm just talking about, people who are charged with making significant responsibilities and decisions right now for us. That's something that I think about in terms of really thinking that we're all learning. None of us have really been through this before to know, what is it that we're going to need to change today or tomorrow to get through this.
I've got a great question building on this topic from Lisa, who asks, what would be your top 3 tips to keep teams motivated through the continued COVID life and shift that focus on silver lining? So how do you instill that kind of sense of optimism and purpose in your teams during a time of uncertainty?
I think, one of the biggest things that I find is very valuable is reminding your team individually about what it is that their contribution and value is to the company, right? So that knowing that that they know that how valuable it is that they are personally for the work that they do and how that contributes to the bigger picture of the company. They need to sort of see that alignment to the business and why it is that they're important and the work that they do is important. So that to me is really important. The other second thing I would say is to go back to what we said earlier in terms of that, knowing that you're flexible, that you're adaptable, that you can change things, that if that meeting isn't working for them at 9 and 9:10 makes a difference or whatever it might be, or that, during the day they might have to take care of something with the kid and so they're going to be working later or whatever that might be, or that the work is getting done, that flexibility and openness is there to that. And sometimes I think it's just simply being there, right? Being available, being able to listen, being able to do something. One of the things that I did earlier during the pandemic was I put out onto LinkedIn some kind of a statement that basically said, look, if you're in my network and you need some help with something, recognizing that people had lost, some of them had lost their jobs, what have you. Do you need a reference? Is there someone in my network that you want to talk to because you're looking for something? Can I make a connection for you? It was just sort of an offering of, I'm here. And if you need something that I can actually do for you, I'm here for you. And putting that out there, it was really great to see, people that I knew, people that I hadn't heard from in quite some time, saying, I'm looking and I need some help with this. And where I could make those introductions, where I could do that, it was a relatively small gesture in the big picture that, someone's there for you, right? And so being able to put that out there, I think is really helpful. To say
Well, and I
those
think
words.
it also gives you a boost too. Like, I mean, those are sort of the chemical boosts that we give ourselves, those dopamine hits or serotonin or whatever it is from helping or giving or supporting. I think that's great. And I think the other thing too that, I think you mentioned earlier, but this is sort of idea too of cultivating gratitude. I think that's one of the things you can do within a team. I know for our team, I mean, we've had this practice long before the pandemic, but we've always sort of done a weekly stand-up meeting, and it's always the same. I think I sometimes feel like it's just getting redundant for everybody, but it's actually super useful from a neuroscience perspective, where every Monday morning we get together. It's a 10-minute meeting, and we whip around, and everybody says something great that happened to them with the week before, a highlight.
Right.
It can be personal, it can be professional. What's their top 3 kind of agenda items for the coming week. And that priming your brain to the positive, and I've said to, sometimes I've said to people where they're not even COVID, but just going through massive change in an organization, everything feels like overwhelming and hard, is, just do meetings or open every one of your meeting with something you're grateful for. Because I mean, part of that is
Yeah.
just getting that gratitude going within the team. And I think the other thing too, what you said, which I think often gets overlooked, is that personal check-in. How are you doing?
Yes.
Where, and I think the thing too
Right.
is it's like, how are you doing today? Like, that's
Yeah.
really the question,
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
doing. How are you
Right.
doing
Are you
today?
doing today, right now? Right. Yeah. No,
This
exactly.
moment. So
Exactly.
I think that's often very simple strategies, but I think as leaders too, like, I guess, this month actually is mentoring month. And I was curious about how your mentors, and, you talked about your husband really being a mentor for you around the book. He's a great support and everything. But how did mentors play a role for you kind of over the last 10 months of navigating this pandemic? Are there people, resources that you've relied on as a leader to get yourself through?
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly went to some of the, particularly for me, some of the women in leadership roles in the company to sort of just hear where they were at and what was going on, to check in. I found that very helpful. I found that I, probably heard the words that I needed to hear. Um, but my mentorship sort of didn't just, that was a work check-in, but I think this is so personal, right?
Mm.
This goes well beyond the workplace. And so more than mentorship, it was friendships that I was really, turning to sort of commiserate with, laugh with, live out those memes with. Those the moments where I was, to be honest, sort of helping to keep the sanity, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that I wasn't in this alone, that the frustrations that I was feeling with whatever was happening with the pandemic, my fears, my frustrations, seeing that in meme form or talking to my girlfriends to get that kind of that validation was very, very helpful, right? To
Mm.
know that this is, and that helps you to sort of, it goes back to that, this theme that we're talking about. How do you keep your sanity? You are not alone in this effort. And yes, it takes a little bit of work to figure out what your coping strategies are and what your coping mechanisms are. Um, and mentors can be a tremendous help in in part of that effort if you have them, and would highly recommend reaching out to them.
Yeah, I mean, and I think sometimes we think of mentors in this very sort of formalized way. And yeah, I think,
Right.
like, I find, like, we run a lot of, I think people on the call know, like, a lot of group leadership programs. I mean, I get as much from listening to leaders talk about their challenges. And I think that's, what I've always seen over the years when you get a group together, that commiseration, that, I'm not
Yeah.
in this alone, is so
Yeah.
hugely powerful. And I think, in the socialized, I know for us at the start of the pandemic, we had sort of drop-in calls for members of our community that could just come on and just talk about whatever they needed to talk about.
Right.
And it was really interesting to see how, just that opportunity to be able to get together and, to your point, laugh, just how are we going to get through it, and then week to week see people getting through it, see people
Right.
having taken the ideas and suggestions and kind of acting on it. Very powerful. Like, I think we are going back to, this whole notion of, we're social beings. And I think, I think one of the things that, I'm curious about, just as we coming to the end here, is, this Zoom fatigue thing is very real.
Yeah.
And the idea of, I know at the start, everybody was like having Zoom trivia nights and Zoom parties
Right.
and Zoom this and like, I think for me, the thought of being on a Zoom call in the evening after
Yeah.
I've been on nonstop Zoom things all day is, quite honestly, as much as I love my
The
friends,
last thing you want to do.
honestly, like, I really miss my book
Right.
club, but the thought of having to organize a Zoom book club night, I'm kind of over it, So
Yeah.
as we sort of think about going into 2021, like, how are we going to, like, as you're thinking about it, how are you, managing the Zoom fatigue, and what are some things that you're thinking about for your team to kind of get beyond that, to build those connections and to have those, ways of, do you have any ideas? Because I'm kind of feeling,
I think, I'll be honest with you in the sense that I don't I think technology is here to stay. Like,
Mm.
I don't think that we can really escape that. Certainly not from a work perspective. If we are going to be continuing to work from home, and we're in this for the foreseeable future. So unfortunately, I think that that's not the case. I think it's important though in the evenings to really just carve out and say that no.
Mm.
Like if you're going to do a Zoom evening, then perhaps you do it. It's one night a week. It's the Friday night, and it's one group of friends or what have you do. But really, maybe it's taking the break to say we're not. Or you get on the phone and have an old-fashioned phone conversation with a
Yes,
friend as
I've been
opposed
mixing
to
up with
a
more phone calls.
right,
I have to say that's been one of my strategies, is to have more
right.
old school phone calls.
Yeah. And if it's safe to be outside with your masks and do it from a distance, then where and when that's permissible and you can do that, maybe that's an option too. But I think the bigger answer for me is sometimes you just have to say no,
Yeah,
and you just don't do it
yeah.
for your own mental health, right? For your own sanity. If it's doing more worse than good, then just say no.
Well, and I think, and this is a good note to probably end up on, is I think we have to treat ourselves with compassion, right? And I think being
Yes.
compassionate about where we're at, because as much as we, we'll kind of lean in and check in with our teams. I mean, on the days that you're not having a great day, on the days that your energy isn't there as a leader, that compassion, we are on this roller coaster. This thing is an up and downhill thing, depending on, what's going on in the outer world and all of the things that we can't control. So treating ourselves and others with compassion and understanding is probably that's probably the word that we all need to adopt for this year. Going back to that
Right.
word.
If we didn't know that before, we really should be doing it now, right?
Wow. Well, awesome. Well, Zenia, thank you so much for spending this hour with us today and kind of sharing your
Thank you.
perspective and all of the things. So I'll get Shelby. I know we've got a couple of just kind of parting slides to wrap us up. For those of you who are new to the roundtable, just to let you know, we're a group coaching company, and I always like to say we help leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth. So if you're perfect for a pandemic. So we do group coaching programs and team coaching programs, and you can reach out and learn more about our stuff. I wrote a book last year as well, although I'd actually written it before it launched last year. So I don't really feel like I can claim that I wrote a book in a pandemic. I launched a book in a pandemic, which is exercise on its own, which if you're looking to build a peer community and have peer support, it's basically a playbook for that. So give it a read if you haven't already. And we're having our next Ask the Expert is with Riaz, who is he's a former broadcaster, and he's going to be talking about every conversation counts, but also this idea of loneliness and this loneliness social pandemic. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Hopefully you'll be able to join us January 26th. Registration's open for that. And then I think in February, we're going to have Bob Joseph, who is the author of 21 Things You Might Not Know About the Indian Act. And I will tell you, I knew nothing about the Indian Act. And so it was a great book too. So a couple of great speakers coming up. But Zenia, thank you for being with us today. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
And look forward to seeing you at a future Ask the Expert. Have a great day. Have a great week.
Thanks.